Assalamu alaikum, dear students. This is lecture number 21, and it's about life and works of William Wordsworth. Remember, Wordsworth is a new critic who we have to study. We have to study here Wordsworth Preface to Lyrical Ballads. So, let's talk about his life and works. If we talk about Wordsworth life and works, we find that William Wordsworth, he was a second son of a lower middle class family, uh, and he was born on April 7, 1770, a Cockermouth in the Lake District of C- Cumberland. He lost his parents at a very early age, and the loss of his parents at an early age made him dependent upon his uncles for his education. Means he then had to depend on his uncle for education. He went to school at Hofsted, where he read what he wanted. He was greatly influenced. Remember, Wordsworth was greatly influenced at this early age itself by the scenes around him. He was a great observer and he used to observe things around him. In 1787, Wordsworth entered St. John's College in Cambridge as an undergraduate. Sorry, he did not much care for the college curriculum, and it was during this period when he spent his holidays at Hofsted and Penrith. And over there, he met Mary Hutchinson, whom he married later on. Then he visited France, met with Annette Vallon, and the French Revolution then started. Wordsworth interrupted his educational career in 1790 when he went on a working tour of France, Switzerland, and Italy with with one of his friends. In 1791, after receiving his degree at Cambridge, Wordsworth returned to France and then ostensibly he started learning the language. Here, Wordsworth met Annette Wellen, for whom he developed a deep passion. He had a daughter, Caroline, by Annette Wellen, but it is thought that he did not marry her. Then you'll find the French Revolution, the mention of French Revolution. The revolution in France initially affected Wordsworth very deeply. वर्ड्सवर्थ शुरू में तो बहुत ज़्यादा मुतासिर हुआ था फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन से. But remember, his friend did not like it. His friend did not like Wordsworth to take interest in French Revolution actively. So what happened that his friends asked him to return, otherwise they would stop helping him financially. As you know that his friends used to help him financially, and they were bearing his expenses. So when his friends, warned him to uh, return to England and to stop taking a interest in the French Revolution. So he had to return to England. उसको वापस आना पड़ा. But the philosophy he acquired in the course of the revolution left a lasting mark or effect on Wordsworth. It is something that can be seen in his spokesmanship for the common man. He spoke for the common man, and it is something that we can see in it. He later on became disappointed with it. Why? Because he thought that the excesses committed in the name of the revolution was not good or were not good. So he was disappointed very much. And what disappointed him was definitely or the excesses committed in the name of the revolution. The excesses and the declaration of war between England and France also brought a rude shock to the poet's dreams of a newborn world. He had a different dream for the newborn world, and that was a kind of shock to him. The world in which liberty held full sway. Liberty was at stake. At this period of crisis, his sister Dorothy played an important role as healer. Remember, she had a very good role to play with. She was playing a very important role with Wordsworth. In 1795, a fortunate legacy enabled Wordsworth to settle down at Racedown with his sister. Now, here he met Coleridge and then began a significant friendship of his career. And remember, when when Lyrical Ballad was published in 1798, so it was the beginning of the new classical, new kind of poetry. It was the beginning of romantic movement, and a long age that was more than 100 years. You know, of a that was more than 100 years of age on ended with the publication of Lyrical Ballad. In that Lyrical Ballad, there were almost 17 poems there which belonged to Wordsworth, and five to six poems were written by Coleridge. So, Lyrical Ballad consisted of 23 poems. In 1797, Coleridge moved to Somersetshire, and the Miss Wordsworth and his sisters both followed him. In 1798, the two writers published jointly that little volume, which would eventually come into its own as one of the most important milestones of English literature. Lyrical Ballads. After the publication of Lyrical Ballads, the Wordsworth went on a tour of Germany, and it was in the winters spent in Germany that Wordsworth wrote the famous poems of Lucy series. When this lyrical ballad was published, so definitely it was a kind of shock for people. It was a kind of new kind of work for the poetry for people, and it was difficult for them to understand. And then in Wordsworth, in got another edition published in 1800, in which he attached Preface to Lyrical Ballad. In that preface, he explained why he introduced such a kind of poetry and what were the reasons behind introducing or behind bringing such kind of poetry, in which different subject matters were focused and different things were focused. If we talk about Wordsworth's marriage and his last years, we can find that in 1799. Remember, in 1799, Wordsworth and his sister settled at Grasmere. So towards the end of 1799, Wordsworth and his sister both settled at Grasmere. In 1802, he married his. So in again, once again, in 1802, he married his childhood friend Mary. Hutchinson. As their family grew in size, they moved to Redall Mount, which was his last abode or home. As he grew older, as Wordsworth grew older, he became more conservative in matters of religion and politics. This is again a very important thing to remember and to keep in mind that as Wordsworth grew older, he became more conservative in matters of religion and politics. In 1843, long after the passage of his really creative period, remember, long after the passage of his really creative period, he was appointed poet laureate. And it is a great honor for a poet. So he was appointed poet laureate in 1843, just 7 years before his death. And when he was 73 years old, so he was appointed poet laureate. He died at Riddle Mount on April 23rd, 1850, and he was buried at Gracemere Churchyard. Remember, Wordsworth was or is considered to be the complete representative of Romantic movement. He is the only writer, only poet who survived and who saw or experienced or observed the entire Romantic movement or Romantic era. Though Wordsworth's works had been criticized earlier when they were published, the passage of time brought admiration and respect. With the passage of time, he became or he has become more popular in literary world. After his death, a monument in his honor was erected in Westminster Abbey. If we talk about Wordsworth's works, principal works or main works, we can find that lyrical ballads. Remember, Lyrical Ballads, which was published in 1798, and he got it published with Coleridge. There were 17 poems of Wordsworth and 6 poems of Coleridge. Coleridge's masterpiece was also there, that is Ancient Mariner. Lyrical ballad then enlarged with preface that was attached to uh, lyrical ballads in 1800, in which Wordsworth explained what kind of poetry he has introduced or he has brought. And this lyrical ballad, preface to lyrical ballad, we are studying him. And through this, we have also seen Wordsworth another phase that is as a critic. Remember, Wordsworth was a poet. He was a poet of nature. He was not a critic. But since he brought a new kind of poetry and he had to explain this kind of poetry himself, and that is why he explained this kind of poetry in the preface to the lyrical ballads. Then poems in two volumes in 1807, The Excursion in 1814, The White Dove of Wellstone in 1815, Peter Mel, Peter Bell and the Wagoner in 1819, Sonnets in 1838, The Prelude in 1850, the year when he died, this prelude was published. And there are some other principles works as well, which we can see when we study his poetry, like poems chiefly of early and later years, 1842, collected poems, 1849 and 50, these were published, and of course ecclesiastical SHS in 1822. If we talk about Wordsworth's literary career, if we talk about Wordsworth's literary career, we can find that the works of Wordsworth span over a long number of years. काफ़ी सालों मतलब तक इसका जो काम है वो चलता रहा. They are not equally good. Of course, if we study or if we see, we can find that his works also show a singular lack of unity. But they are not all equally good. सब एक जैसा काम नहीं है. Matthew Arnold makes a valid remark that one or a reader has to weed out the bad poems from the works of Wordsworth before he enjoys his value as a poet. A reader has to be very careful in weeding out, in selecting, the good works. It's not like this that you just pick work and you'll find it of great level. You have to be very careful. Critics divide his literary career into a number of phases. For example, G.M. Harper, he feels that his career can be divided into three phases, which Batson considers it to fall into six periods. Then there is another critic, Herbert Reads. His contention, or he says that the most is accept his, view is the most acceptable one. He divides, the poet's career into four periods, and this is what we have right now with us. Now, the first period you will find before 1791, and it is best known. You will find the best known poems of this period are descriptive sketches and evening walk. Again, the best poems, known poems of this period are the descriptive sketches and evening walk. So these poems are written in the traditional classical couplet. They're written in the traditional classical couplet, and both have much in common with the popular style of poetry at the time. But if we talk about these poems, we can find Wordsworth's fascination regarding nature is already very much clear. It is very much clear his fascination to, in relation to nature. Then we see second period. The second period, is from 1792 to 1799. 1792 to 1799. This period is considered to be one of depression and remorse for Wordsworth. It's not a very good. It's not very good period for Wordsworth. His visit to France had brought about the meeting with Annette Vallon. He visited France, and over there he met Ellen Vallon, and then you'll find that a feeling of guilt affected him, both as regard his situation with Annette as well as his disappointment with revolution. Not only with Annette but also with revolution, यानी कि न सिर्फ उससे जो डिसअपॉइंटमेंट हुई एनिट वैलेंस से हुई, बल्कि वो जो रेवोल्यूशन की वजह से मामला आए थे उसकी वजह से भी काफ़ी उसे मायूसी का सामना करना पड़ा. तो थोड़ी इस जो पीरियड है इसमें उसे डिप्रेशन और रिमोर्स यानी कि पछतावा वगैरह उससे गुजरना पड़ा. His gloom tried to find an outlet through tragedy, और ट्रेजिडी के ज़रिए वो अपने इस जो गम और परेशानी से छुटकारा हासिल करना चाहता था. He wrote the borders, guilt and sorrow, Margaret or the ruined cottage. They were not successful efforts. अगरचे ये कामयाब नहीं रहे, but the ruined cottage indicates a potentiality of Wordsworth poetic sensibility. लेकिन उससे Wordsworth की poetic sensibility काफी सामने आई. Now the third period, the glorious creative. It is considered to be the glorious creative period, and this is from 1797 to 1807. And this period is probably called the best period for Wordsworth. This period between 1797 and 807 saw the height of Wordsworth's creative powers. ये चीज़ ध्यान में रखिएगा. It saw the height of Wordsworth's creative powers. In it, Wordsworth was influenced by his sister Dorothy and his friend Coleridge. And this is the period when romantic movement began properly. This is a period when 1798 Wordsworth got Lyrical Ballads, a collection of poems, a collection of 23 poems published, in which majority of the poems belong to Wordsworth and few poems belong to Coleridge. And with the publication of Lyrical Ballad in 1798, the romantic movement began properly. उससे पहले कुछ ट्रेसेस थे, कुछ चीज़ें आपको हिंट्स मिल जाते, लेकिन जैसे ये लिरिकल बैलेड पब्लिश हुआ, तो उसके बाद जो है ये मूवमेंट और रोमांटिसिज्म सही मानों में स्टार्ट हुआ. Now he was influenced by his sister Dorothy and his friend Coleridge, and he again looked at nature with an eye of joy. He again looked at nature with the eye of joy. Now, the legacy left by his friend had freed him from financial worries. इसके एक दोस्त था, उसने इसे कुछ जो है पैसा और ये वेल्थ उसके लिए छोड़ी, एंड दैट फ्रीड हिम फ्रॉम फाइनेंशियल वरीज. और इसकी वजह से जो था वर्ड्सवर्थ माली तौर पे जो मसाइल का शिकार रह रहा था, उससे उसकी जान छुटी. Now, the main achievements of this period makes him a justly famous poet. You'll find a brief resume of some of the important works of this period, like you'll find Lyrical Ballads. Lyrical Ballads that was published in 1798. It ushered in a new era of romanticism in poetry. It was a trumpet that heralded the dawn of a new era by making the prophecy that poetry and unlimitable art could not and should not be fitted by narrow bonds of artificial conventions. जैसे कि मैंने आपसे कहा, जब 1798 में लिरिकल बैलेट्स पब्लिश किया गया, तो इसने आते साथ ही जो है डेफिनेटली इट वाज टोटली अ न्यू काइंड ऑफ पोएट्री. एंड दिस काइंड ऑफ पोएट्री पीपल डिड नॉट रीड. तो तकरीबन 100 साल से ज़्यादा लोग कुछ और पढ़े थे, अचानक कोई उसके अपोजिट या कोई और चीज़ नज़र आई तो लोग भी परेशान हुए. एंड देन व्हाट हैपेंड दैट he had to explain what kind of poetry he wrote. The first edition of Lyrical Ballads consisted of 23 poems, 19 by Wordsworth और कुछ किताबों में 17 भी आपको मिलेगा, and 4 by Coleridge. The book contains some of the best poems in English literature. अच्छा, इन इस बैलेट में, इस कलेक्शन ऑफ पोएम्स में कुछ पोएम्स ऐसी हैं जो कि अंग्रेजी लिटरेचर में, अदब में बेहतरीन पोएम्स कहलाती हैं. दे आर टिपिकल ऑफ वर्ड्सवर्थ स्टाइल. वर्ड्सवर्थ का टिपिकल स्टाइल जो आपको इसमें नजर आएगा. Poems such as lines written in fountain early spring, Tinton Abbey, Michael, etc., showed the genius of Wordsworth. A valuable addition to the edition of the lyrical ballad, 1800 edition of the lyrical ballads, was the Preface, in which Wordsworth explained his famous theory of poetry and poetic diction. The prelude. Then you will find the to the 18th edition of lyrical ballads was added the Lucy poems, Cutting and Ruth, and there is a tender grace about the Lucy poems which eludes description, a spiritual touch which Wordsworth could never again recapture. The Lucy poems were also composed in 1799. Lucy poems जो थी ये भी 1799 में कंपोज की गई. द प्रिल्यूड भी इसके अंदर शामिल है. An alternative title of this long poem was the account of the growth of a poet's mind. Obviously, it is an autobiographical work and it consists of 14 books. So it was begun in 1799. Sorry, इस पीरियड के अंदर वो शामिल है. It was begun in 1799 and was completed in 1805. तकरीबन 51 मतलब 6 साल लगे इस पोएम को कंप्लीट होने में, और ये 14 बुक्स पर मुश्तमिल थी. But it was published in 1850 and it was an autobiographical uh, poem. The poem was intended to form a part of the lyric leaves, which, however, was never completed. In the prelude, Wordsworth records his development from childhood to the days of his maturity. इस poem में आपको Wordsworth जो है रिकॉर्ड करते हुए नजर आएंगे his development from childhood to the days of maturity. It is perhaps it is too long to be good throughout, but the parts where Wordsworth talks to of the formative influences of nature are not worthy. The excursions इसमें or this poem too formed a part of the bigger plan for the recluse. The sonnets, it was hearing on hearing the sonnets of Milton that Wordsworth became inspired to write sonnets himself. ही कंटिन्यू टू राइट सॉनेट्स फ्रॉम 1800 यानी कि 1801 से लेकर अपनी ज़िंदगी के आखिरी दिनों तक ये सोनेट्स लिखता रहा एंड ही रोड मोर देन 500 सोनेट्स तकरीबन 500 से ज़्यादा सोनेट उसने लिखे ही ऑल्सो रोड पेट्रियोटिक सोनेट्स विच बिलोंग टू द पीरियड 1802 टू 1811 1802 से लेकर 1811 तक उसने लिखे पेट्रियोटिक सोनेट्स सम ऑफ दीज सोनेट्स आर जस्टिफाइबली फेमस कुछ इनमें से बहुत ज़्यादा फेमस हैं In them, his lyrical mood burns clear and strong, and as a result, they rank among the best in English poetry. इसलिए English poetry में कुछ उनमें से best भी करार दिए जाते हैं. He revived the Petrarchian sonnets. Some of the best sonnets he wrote are Upon Westminster Bridge, The World is Too Much with Us, Milton, and the series of sonnets of River Duden. Poems in two volumes. These two volumes contain ballads, short poems, sonnets, ode on the intimations of immortality, ode on duty, the solitary repair, the daffodils, the green linnet to the cuckoo, resolution and independence. Indeed, these two volumes are representative of the poet at the zenith of his powers. And many of the poems have become greatly popular, and many of them are typical of Wordsworth as a nature poet of nature. उसके बाद जो चौथा पीरियड है ये थर्ड पीरियड था जो कि ग्लोरियस पीरियड कहा जाता कहलाया जाता है ग्लोरियस पीरियड ऑफ हिज क्रिएटिव पावर्स द फोर्थ पीरियड is something that begins from 1808 and ends with his death in 1850 मतलब आखिर तक वो लिखता रहा वर्ड्सवर्थ पोइटिक पावर्स बिगेन टू डिक्लाइन आफ्टर 808 इट इज सेड ये कहा जाता है कि वर्ड्सवर्थ की जो पोइटिक टैलेंट और पावर्स थे वो 1808 के बाद डिक्लाइन करता रहा when he was 38 years old. In this period, we only have momentary glimpses of the genius of Wordsworth. In flashes to say, Arnold was right when he said, Arnold ने सही कहा था जब उसने कहा था that Wordsworth continued to write even when the mood was not on him. मतलब ये उस वक्त भी लिखता रहा जब मूड ही नहीं था उसका यानी कि उसके पास फीलिंग्स ही नहीं गालिब और वो फिर भी लिखता रहा सो मच ऑफ व्हाट वर्ड्सवर्थ रोट इन दिस पीरियड इज मीडियोकर तो जो ज़्यादा जो उसने लिखा इस पीरियड में इस चौथे पीरियड में वो मीडियोकर टाइप का काम था and this period to this period belongs to Lidamia, ecclesiastical sketches, the River Duden, sonnets वगैरह थे towards the end of his career and life वर्ड्सवर्थ became a conservative और आखिर में वर्ड्सवर्थ अपनी ज़िंदगी के आखिर में आखिरी दिनों में कंजर्वेटिव हो गया था रिलीजन और पॉलिटिक्स दोनों के मामले इन relation regarding religion and politics he became conservative his poetical fire and beauty we have our last glimpse of Wordsworth in the full and peculiar power of his genius तो इस तरह से वर्ड्सवर्थ के जो करियर है उनको चार पीरियड्स में डिवाइड किया जा सकता है जिसका मैंने अभी आपको थोड़ा तफसील बताया द फर्स्ट पीरियड बिफोर 1791 and that is the initial period and then the second period from 1792 to 1799 but the third period is the most important period why because it is considered to be the glorious period of his creative power in which he has written great pieces of work and you will find here Preface to Lyrical Ballads as well, which was, it is a collection which was published in 1798, and with this publication, the new era began, and that new era is the Romantic movement. The fourth period is from 1808 to 1850, and this is the decline of his poetic powers. Then you will find Wordsworth critical writings. If you talk about, remember Wordsworth was not a critic, वो कोई critic नहीं था. ये चीज़ ज़हन में बार बार याद रखिएगा कि वो he was not a critic, he was a poet of nature. But since he brought a new kind of poetry, and that new kind of poetry was difficult for people to understand, so that is why he explained things. He explained, and you can say he tried to justify what he brought in the Preface to Lyrical Ballad of 1800. So Wordsworth was more a poet than critic. As a critic, he has not only left any systematic work, nor has he written any comprehensive thesis on literary criticism. What we can call the main production of his critical views are included in the advertisement to the Lyrical Ballads in 1798, Preface to Lyrical Ballads in 1800, Preface to Lyrical Ballads in 1802, alongside or along with an appendix on poetic diction. एक poetic diction पर उसने appendix भी लिखा. Remember, Wordsworth constantly, continuously revised the paraphrase with each edition. हर edition के साथ वो constantly paraphrase को revise करता रहा. In the 1850 edition of Lyrical Ballads, Wordsworth wrote a new paraphrase, and the earlier paraphrase was added to an appendix. If it sees, so we can find that in this edition, it you'll also find the essay supplementary to the preface. So we can say that we do not have much, we do not have many critical writings of Wordsworth, but Wordsworth critical pronouncements had a great and remarkable impact and effect on the course of English literature. They changed the attitude of a complete nation, a whole nation, entire nation towards poetry. Now we are taking a short break of Azan. After Azan, I will continue. So if we talk about welcome back after Azan. So if we talk about major novelists, we can find in this era, remember in the Romantic movement, the so with this I end this session. If students have any problems, so please you can you can ask.